I will cut this relation.
I can't right now.
Right
I
now.
am not ready.
Ben ne yapıyorum burada hiç yani benim dış kapıda dış mandal gibi oldum burada. Ne yaptığımı bilmiyorum.
Rasit was willing to stop the wedding over one answer from Mallorie. Not money, not the prenup, not another fight with somebody in her family. A baby. And the more you look at this argument, the less it feels like a sudden disagreement about children, and the more it looks like the moment every unresolved problem in their relationship finally crashed into the same conversation. Because Mallorie saying, I'm not ready to have children, is only half of this. She absolutely has the right to decide whether motherhood is right for her. Rasit moving countries, planning a wedding, or wanting a family does not give him ownership over that decision. But there is another question that is much harder for Mallorie to escape. How did they get this close to marriage without being completely clear on whether they wanted the same future? Rasit apparently came to America believing marriage would eventually mean children. Mallorie had serious enough doubts that, when finally pushed for an answer, she could only say she wasn't ready. And suddenly, their older fights start looking different. First, there was tension around Mallorie's settlement money. Then came the prenup. Rasit already felt like Mallorie was protecting herself from him before they were even married. Now he's hearing that the family he imagined building may not happen either. So when Mallorie says, I'm not ready, Rasit may be hearing something much bigger. Maybe the life you thought you came here to build isn't the life I want. That explains why he's hurt. It does not excuse everything he says next. Because there's a huge difference between saying, I need children in my future, so maybe we're incompatible, and saying, if you really loved me, you would give me children. One is a deal breaker. The other turns motherhood into a loyalty test. And that is where this gets messy. Who actually failed the relationship here? Mallorie, for allowing such a major question to remain unresolved until this late? Rasit, for turning her uncertainty into proof that she doesn't love him? Or did these two fall in love while imagining completely different versions of what marriage was supposed to look like? Because if that's the real problem, getting through the wedding will not fix anything. It might actually make everything worse. The first thing we have to separate is something viewers keep combining. Mallorie must have Rasit's baby, and Mallorie should have discussed her uncertainty much earlier are not the same argument. She does not owe him a child. Full stop. But if becoming a father was essential to Rasit's idea of marriage, he deserved to know that the person he was planning to marry might not want the same thing. And that standard has to work both ways. If Rasit knew fatherhood was completely non-negotiable, then he also needed to make that crystal clear before relocating, before the wedding planning, and before they reached this point where every answer feels like a threat to the relationship. Because kids are not one of those things you casually figure out after the wedding. You can compromise on where you live. You can compromise on holidays. You can compromise on spending habits. You can argue about whose family gets more visits. Children are different. There is no halfway answer. Either you eventually become parents or you don't. And if somebody gives in because they're terrified of losing their partner, the wedding might survive while the resentment quietly starts growing. That's why I don't think Rasit's deepest fear is simply, Mallorie doesn't want a baby right now. I think his deeper fear is, what if I made all of these decisions for a future that was never actually agreed on? And when you add their previous money conflict, that fear gets much easier to understand. Mallorie had already become protective over her financial security. Her accident settlement became a sensitive point after Rasit showed interest in using some of that money. From Mallorie's side, that caution is understandable. That money belongs to her. Protecting it does not automatically mean she thinks Rasit is evil, a scammer, or someone she expects to divorce. Sometimes, financial protection is simply financial protection. And honestly, when you're entering a marriage that already has international relocation, family expectations, immigration pressure, and major lifestyle changes involved, pretending money does not matter would be naive. But Rasit did not seem to experience the prenup as a boring financial document. He experienced it emotionally. To him, it appeared to say, Mallorie is already thinking about what happens when this marriage fails. That matters, because now the baby conversation lands on top of that insecurity. Put yourself in his position for a second. First, your future wife wants legal protection around her assets. Then you discover she's not sure she wants children. And from your perspective, you're hearing all of this after you've already rearranged your life. You can see how his mind starts connecting dots. She doesn't trust me with money. She doesn't know if she wants a family with me. Maybe she's not as committed as I thought. That's where Rait's emotional reaction comes from. But here's where he loses me. Those dots do not automatically lead to, she doesn't love me. That's too big a jump. Love is not the same thing as compatibility. And that's the uncomfortable truth underneath this entire storyline. Mallorie could genuinely love Rait and still decide she does not want to become a mother. Rait could genuinely love Mallorie and still decide he cannot marry somebody who may never want children. Those things can coexist. Sometimes two people love each other and still should not get married. Reality TV doesn't always handle that idea very well because everything is built around the countdown. The visa clock is running. The wedding has to happen. The family is watching. The venue has to be booked. Everybody keeps asking, are you doing this or not? So every relationship problem gets treated like it needs an instant answer. But motherhood is probably one of the worst decisions you could force because a deadline is getting close. And Mallorie's exact language matters here. She isn't necessarily saying, I will never have children. She says she's not ready. That leaves uncertainty. But uncertainty creates its own problem when the other person needs certainty. If Rait knows he absolutely wants to become a father, he does not have to marry Mallorie and spend the next 5 years waiting to see whether she changes her mind. He has a right to say, I love you, but this future matters too much to me. That is not automatically controlling. That's a legitimate deal breaker. The problem is how he frames it, because after speaking with his brother, the issue stops sounding like a question of compatibility and starts sounding like a test of Mallorie's love. His brother basically pushes the idea that if Mallorie doesn't give Rait children, then she doesn't truly love him. And I think that's one of the worst pieces of advice he could have received in that moment. Because now the question is no longer, do we want the same life? The question becomes, will Mallorie prove that she loves me? Those are completely different conversations. If Mallorie says no to motherhood after that framing, she risks being treated like she's saying no to Rait. If she says yes because she doesn't want to lose him, then is that actually a free decision? That's the danger. A child cannot become evidence that your partner loves you enough. And honestly, this is exactly where the audience starts splitting. Some fans are looking at Mallorie and saying she waited way too long. Their argument is simple. You do not let somebody uproot their life while a massive deal breaker remains hidden or unresolved. And I understand why viewers feel that way. An international relationship raises the stakes. Someone is leaving family. Someone may be leaving work. Someone is entering a country where they initially depend more heavily on their partner. Those decisions are being made based on a shared picture of the future. If that picture includes children for one person and serious uncertainty for the other, then that difference needs to be talked about early. Not when you're already touring wedding venues. Not when everybody is asking for final decisions. Not when walking away means both people feel like they've lost years of effort. This is why Rait's I feel played reaction shouldn't just be dismissed. That does not prove Mallorie intentionally deceived him. We do not have enough evidence to say that. But emotionally, I feel played can also mean I made life decisions based on a future that now feels less certain than I was led to believe. That's a legitimate feeling. Then you have the other side of the audience saying, wait a minute, Rait chose to move. That does not mean Mallorie owes him pregnancy. And they're right too. Immigration sacrifice cannot become a debt somebody pays with motherhood. I left my country for you cannot become. Therefore, you have to give me the family I expected. That's not a fair trade. And that is what makes the situation so interesting. There is no clean villain. There are two people with legitimate needs who may have handled the hardest conversation in their relationship far too late. Mallorie can be wrong about the timing without being wrong about her feelings. Rait can be right that children are a deal breaker without being right about using love to pressure her. Both can be true. And if you're looking for the deeper relationship pattern here, that's it. They keep turning disagreement into rejection. Mallorie wants to protect her settlement money. Rait hears, you don't trust me. Mallorie wants a prenup. Rait hears, you're planning to leave me. Mallorie says she's not ready for children. Rait hears, you don't love me. But now flip the whole thing around. Rait talks about money. Mallorie sees a threat to her security. Rait demands an answer about kids. Mallorie experiences pressure. Rait wants reassurance. Mallorie may experience that reassurance as him trying to control her decision. Every practical disagreement gets translated into something emotional. And once a couple falls into that pattern, nothing stays small. A prenup isn't a prenup anymore. It's a statement about trust. A baby isn't a baby anymore. It's proof of love. Money isn't money anymore. It's proof of intention. Every argument becomes a referendum on the entire relationship. And that's exhausting because old problems never actually disappear. They get stored. Then the next conflict wakes them back up. That's why this baby conversation is carrying so much weight. Rasit isn't reacting only to children. He's reacting to the prenup too. He's reacting to money. He's reacting to the move. He's reacting to the fear that Mallorie has been more cautious about this marriage than he realized. And Mallorie probably isn't reacting only to his desire for children either. She's reacting to feeling pressured. She's reacting to the earlier money tension. She's reacting to the possibility that her independence keeps being interpreted as rejection. So even when they're supposedly discussing one issue, there are 5 other arguments sitting in the room with them. And then there is Mallorie's childhood. Rasit tells his brother that Mallorie had a traumatic childhood and presents that as part of why she has concerns around having children. That changes the emotional temperature of this conversation. Because if Mallorie's hesitation is connected to her own childhood, then telling her, decide now or I'm leaving, does not magically make those fears disappear. It could make them stronger. Maybe she's worried about repeating patterns she grew up with. Maybe she questions whether she can create the kind of home she would want a child to have. Maybe she simply isn't emotionally ready to find out. We should not invent exactly what is going on inside her head. But the childhood context matters because it tells us this may not be a casual preference she's refusing to change. There may be something much deeper behind it. And this is where I have sympathy for Mallorie. Becoming a parent because you're afraid of losing your fiancé would be a terrible reason to become a parent. If she needs time to understand what she wants, then she needs to be honest about that. But here's the counterpoint she cannot avoid. If she has carried these fears for a long time, and if Rasit has always made it clear that he wants children, why was this not handled before? That's where I keep landing. Mallorie does not owe him a baby, but she did owe him clarity about a major uncertainty that could determine whether they were compatible. And Rasit owed her clarity too. If his position has always been, no children means no marriage, she needed to know that wasn't something he would eventually compromise on. Maybe they did have some of these conversations privately. We don't know. And that's important. We're watching an edited television show. We do not have access to every phone call, every text, and every conversation they had before filming. So I'm not comfortable saying Mallorie definitely lied to him. I'm not comfortable saying Rasit definitely misunderstood her either. What we can analyze is the situation they're showing us now. And right now, they clearly do not feel like they're working from the same agreement. That's the problem. Then family steps in and makes the situation even hotter. Rasit goes to his brother looking for advice. That is understandable. When you're hurt, you talk to people you trust. Sometimes family can calm you down. Sometimes they can tell you you're overreacting. Sometimes they can ask the question you were avoiding. But other times, family takes a complicated problem and turns it into a loyalty contest. That's what I think happens here. Instead of encouraging Rasit to understand Mallorie's fear, his brother gives him the simplest, hardest interpretation possible. If she won't give you children, she doesn't love you. Give her an ultimatum. Now, Rasit enters his next conversation, carrying that idea with him. And that's a huge difference. Imagine if he had gone to Mallorie and said, I need you to help me understand this, because I'm scared that the future I came here for is disappearing. That invites a conversation. But when the emotional message becomes, prove you love me by agreeing to a baby, Mallorie immediately has to defend herself. Now she isn't only trying to explain her feelings about motherhood, she has to defend whether she loves him at all. That's how family influence can make a disagreement much worse. And then, somehow, these two are still looking at wedding venues. That might be the strangest part. They're walking around a place where they could celebrate the beginning of their marriage while asking whether the marriage should exist. And in that moment, I actually think Rasit asks one of the most reasonable questions of the entire situation. Why are we planning a venue if we don't even know whether we agree on children? Exactly 30 days remaining does not mean hurry up and book everything. 30 days remaining should mean we need to decide whether going through with this is responsible. The venue does not matter if the life after the venue doesn't work. The flowers don't matter, the cake doesn't matter, the pictures don't matter. None of it matters if one person enters the marriage expecting children and the other person enters hoping the subject will disappear. And that's one of the recurring traps of 90-Day Fiancé. The wedding becomes the finish line. Couples start acting like if they can just survive until the ceremony, they've won. But marriage is not the finish line. That's when the real life starts. Problems that were stressful before marriage do not become easier because somebody put on a ring. Money arguments become shared financial arguments. Family tension becomes in-law tension. Uncertainty about children becomes a clock neither person can ignore forever. And with Mallorie and Rașit, the wedding deadline is making them discuss things they should probably have resolved long before a venue was involved. But there's another layer here that I think is even more revealing. Both Mallorie and Rașit are obsessed with security. They just define security differently. Mallorie appears focused on protecting what she already has. Her settlement, her independence, her emotional safety, her right to make big decisions without being pressured. Rașit appears focused on protecting what he believes he came to build. A marriage, a family, children, a shared future. Mallorie is guarding against what she could lose. Rașit is guarding against what he could fail to get. And because they're protecting different things, they start seeing each other as the danger. Mallorie may look at Rașit and think, you keep asking for access to things that make me feel safe. Rașit may look at Mallorie and think, you keep closing doors on the future I thought we agreed to. Now watch what that creates. Mallorie gets nervous, so she protects herself more. Rașit sees her protecting herself and demands more reassurance. The more he pushes for certainty, the more pressure Mallorie feels. The more Mallorie pulls back, the more suspicious Rașit becomes. That is a cycle. And even if they magically agree on children tomorrow, that cycle is still there. That's the relationship issue I would watch more closely than any single ultimatum. Because if they marry without breaking that cycle, it will attach itself to the next disagreement. Maybe next time it's money. Maybe it's family. Maybe it's where they live. Maybe it's how often Rașit helps relatives. The topic can change. The emotional pattern stays the same. You disagree with me, therefore you don't trust me. You're asking something from me, therefore you're trying to control me. That can destroy a relationship even when the original conflict was completely solvable. And viewers online are picking up on exactly how complicated this is. Some fans are firmly on Rașit's side when it comes to timing. They feel Mallorie should never have allowed a relationship this serious to reach the relocation stage without making her uncertainty about children extremely clear. And honestly, that criticism is not unreasonable. If a partner considers something a life-defining goal, they need accurate information before making life-changing decisions. But another section of the audience is much more concerned about the ultimatum itself. They see Mallorie being put under emotional pressure to make a permanent decision because Rașit wants certainty immediately. And they especially dislike the idea that motherhood is being tied to whether her love is real. That criticism is not unreasonable either. One side is focused on disclosure, the other side is focused on autonomy. And the reason this debate keeps going is because both issues matter. The easiest way to ruin this analysis would be to reduce it to Team Mallorie and Team Rașit. The better question is much more specific. What did each of them believe had already been agreed on? If Mallorie had repeatedly told Rașit, I'm not sure I want children, and he came anyway believing he could change her mind, that changes everything. If Mallorie had previously allowed him to believe children were definitely part of the plan and only revealed serious doubt after he relocated, that changes everything too. And right now, we do not have every private conversation needed to answer that with complete confidence. So instead of inventing missing facts, look at the behavior in front of us. Rașit feels blindsided. Mallorie feels pressured. Neither person feels understood. That's already enough to tell us the communication failed somewhere. And then there are the relationship status rumors. Some fans have looked at wedding images and believe Mallorie and Rașit eventually went through with the marriage. Others have pointed to later social media activity and believe the relationship may have fallen apart. There has also been discussion about comments Rașit reportedly made online. But until there is solid confirmation, those are exactly what they are, fan speculation. They should not be treated as proof that they're married, separated, divorced, or anything else. What is more interesting for the actual storyline is what comes next on the show. Mallorie is expected to offer Rașit some kind of compromise. And I have to say, the word compromise makes me nervous when we're talking about children. What is the compromise? We'll discuss it again in 2 years? That could be reasonable if both people genuinely accept the uncertainty. We'll go to counseling and figure out what each of us really wants. Also reasonable. We'll stop planning the wedding until we have clarity. Honestly, that might be the healthiest option. But if the compromise is Mallorie saying, fine, I'll eventually have a baby because I don't want you to leave, that's not a compromise. That's surrender. And if Rașit says, fine, I'll marry you even though I definitely need children, and I'll just hope you change your mind, that's not compromise either. That's a delayed breakup. Because imagine where this goes 2 years from now. Mallorie still doesn't want children. Rasit starts feeling like she wasted his time. Every time a friend announces a pregnancy, the issue comes back. Every family gathering brings another question. Every year becomes another reminder that he is waiting for an answer. Now imagine the opposite. Mallorie has a child, mainly because she was scared Rasit would leave. Then motherhood becomes much harder than she expected. What happens to the resentment? What happens to the marriage? What happens when Rasit says, but you agreed? That's why this decision has to be made outside the emotional pressure of the wedding. Not what answer keeps us together. What life do I actually want? That's the question. And it sounds simple, but it is very different from asking, do I love this person? You can love somebody and not want the life they want. You can love somebody and still need to walk away. That's painful, but it's real. And I don't think Mallorie and Rasit's relationship should be reduced to people who never cared about each other. Mallorie has defended Rasit before, including when people around them made prejudiced comments involving his Muslim background. She has shown loyalty. Rasit left his family and entered a completely different environment because he believed in their relationship. He has invested too. So I don't see an obviously fake relationship here. I see two people who may genuinely love each other while protecting completely different fears. Mallorie seems afraid of losing herself. Rasit seems afraid of losing the future he expected. And fear makes people demand proof. Prove you trust me. Prove you love me. Protect my money. Promise me a baby. Promise me you aren't using me. Once a relationship reaches that point, everything starts sounding like a negotiation. And marriages built around constant tests do not suddenly become relaxed after the wedding. That's why Rasit's next move matters so much. Can he separate Mallorie's decision about children from her love for him? Because if he cannot, this problem is much bigger than one baby conversation. If every disagreement becomes you would do this if you loved me, then Mallorie will never be able to disagree without threatening the relationship. That's not sustainable. But Mallorie has a responsibility here too. She cannot use I'm not ready forever if deep down she already knows the answer is no. Uncertainty deserves time. Avoidance does not deserve unlimited time. If she knows she does not want children, she needs to tell him. Before the wedding. Not after. Not once they're financially more entangled. Not once everybody has invested even more in making this relationship work. Because keeping Rasit hopeful simply to save the wedding would create exactly the kind of betrayal he already fears. And that's where I think the next episodes could expose whether they're actually solving anything or simply buying time. If Mallorie gives him a vague maybe someday, Rasit might accept it because he wants this marriage so badly. But if maybe someday actually means I hope this problem disappears, they're walking directly into another explosion. The wedding deadline will disappear. The disagreement won't. And that's the danger of sunk cost. We've already come this far. He already moved. We already planned everything. Our families already know. We've already spent money. That kind of thinking keeps people in relationships long after the original agreement has changed. But how much you've already invested cannot tell you whether investing more is smart. Sometimes walking away after years is still better than spending another 10 years trying to force two incompatible futures into one marriage. And that's why I'm not automatically rooting for Mallorie and Rasit to save the wedding. I'm rooting for them to tell the truth. If the truth saves the relationship, great. If the truth ends it. That doesn't automatically mean the relationship was meaningless. Sometimes breaking up is the most respectful thing two people can do when the alternative is demanding that one person give up something fundamental. Mallorie does not owe Rasit motherhood. Rasit does not owe Mallorie a marriage that permanently removes fatherhood from the future he wants. Both statements matter. The unfair part would be Mallorie expecting Rasit to abandon the dream of becoming a father simply because he loves her. And the unfair part would be Rasit expecting Mallorie to become a mother simply because she loves him. Love does not erase incompatibility. Sometimes love is exactly what makes incompatibility so painful. And when I look at their entire arc money, the prenup, trust, family pressure, relocation, marriage, and now children, I don't think the baby argument created their problem. I think it exposed it. These two have never fully agreed on what commitment is supposed to look like. Rasit seems to experience commitment as building one shared future. You trust each other. You plan a family. You stop preparing for the relationship to fail. Mallorie seems to experience commitment as loving somebody without surrendering her independence, her security, or her right to make life-changing decisions carefully. Neither definition is automatically wrong. But until they understand that they are operating from different definitions. Every protective move Mallorie makes will look like rejection to Rasit, and every demand for certainty Rasit makes will feel like pressure to Mallorie. That's the cycle. That's the red flag. And that is what I would be watching even if they eventually get married. A wedding picture cannot answer this. A bachelor party cannot answer this. A marriage certificate cannot answer this. The only thing that matters is whether they can sit down without an ultimatum, without family speaking for them, without the pressure of a venue, and answer one very uncomfortable question honestly. Do we actually want the same life? Because Rasit is not really asking only, will you have a baby? He's asking, is the future I thought I came here to build still real? And Mallorie is not really saying only, I'm not ready. She's asking, can you love me if the future I choose does not look exactly like the one you imagined? If those answers cannot exist together, then no amount of love, wedding planning, or compromise language is going to solve this. So where do you draw the line? If having children was one of the biggest goals of your life, and your partner revealed this late that they might not want them, would you end the relationship immediately? Would you give them more time? And most importantly, do you think Rasit is simply enforcing a legitimate deal breaker? Or did he cross the line the moment Mallorie's willingness to have a child became proof of whether she truly loves him?